just to kind of give you a little bit of background, last fall I did a pro tips webinar on amateur built aircraft maintenance. And that generated a lot of good questions, but a lot of those questions were a little bit more specific to light sport aircraft rather than amateur built. So we got our heads together and decided we'd do a presentation specifically on light sport aircraft maintenance and who's allowed to do that. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. There's my little hooray for me page. Uh, Shows you all the stuff. I think Troy covered most of that. So happy to be along to chat with you all tonight, and hopefully everybody will find some good tidbits in this presentation to help you out. So we are talking about aircraft certificated as light sport aircraft under 14 CFR 21.190. And that is what we typically call special light sport aircraft. These are the factory built ones. And we're also talking about experimental light sport aircraft, which could come from any of the three categories that you see mentioned here on the screen. When light sport aircraft first came into being back in the early 2000s, we had a window of opportunity for people to convert existing ultralight trainers, two-place ultralights, if you will, convert those to light sport aircraft under the mentioned regulation there, 191.I1. That sunset was about, I think, 2008 or 2009 that that particular opportunity closed. Still, there are two other ways to get experimental light sport aircraft, and that's the second two options listed here. There are approved light sport aircraft kits available. The Van's RV-12 being a real popular one, but there are others. So you can, even to this day and going forward, you can build an aircraft from one of these approved light sport kits, and assuming that you do it specifically in conjunction with the manual that comes with the aircraft and do it exactly according to the manufacturer's specifications, you can certificate that aircraft as an experimental light sport aircraft. And then also we have an opportunity for those that started out with a factory built light sport, a special light sport, and for whatever reason, and we'll talk about this a little more as we go on, but whatever reason you might want to convert that aircraft to an experimental category light sport aircraft, there is the opportunity to do that as well. So we have three different ways that you could have come across an experimental light sport aircraft, and of course we have the factory built ones as well, and we'll get into both of these. This is really important. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide because we always end up getting questions about this, and this is one of the most confusing things that the FAA did to us, if you will, about light sport aircraft. We are not, and I have not in capitals specifically there because we get questions all the time about aircraft that are certificated in other categories but might be eligible for operation by sport pilots. Standard category aircraft, your Cubs, your Champs, certain air coups. There's a few others. Those are standard category aircraft. They are under the definition of a light sport aircraft, which makes them eligible for operation by sport pilots, but they are still certificated in standard categories. So they're not a light sport aircraft from the certification side. They're only a light sport aircraft from the operational side. So you've got the same term being used in two different contexts, and it's very confusing to a lot of people. We're not talking about amateur built aircraft, home built aircraft. Again, many of these are eligible for operation by sport pilots and thus are considered light sport aircraft for the operational side of things, but they're not certificated specifically as light sport aircraft. They just happen to meet the requirements. So they're eligible to be operated by sport pilots, but they're not what we're going to discuss here tonight. There are other experimental categories, exhibition, R&D, and some others, and some of those may fit the light sport definition, but we're not going to talk about those, and we're not going to talk about any of the other airworthiness categories that might be out there. We're specifically talking about aircraft that are certificated as light sport aircraft. How do you know? You look at the airworthiness certificate. And in the airworthiness certificate, on the top one or two lines, there's going to be the word light sport aircraft on the airworthiness certificate. That's what you're looking for. It's either going to say it on the top line if it's a factory built light sport, or it'll say it on the second line if it's an experimental light sport. So if it doesn't say light sport on the airworthiness certificate, then what we're talking about tonight doesn't really apply. The regular maintenance regulations that cover that aircraft standard category or whatever, that still applies, even though the aircraft is eligible to be operated by sport pilots. So we're going to drill down on these aircraft that are in the light sport category by certification. So again, it's right on the airworthiness certificate. That's where you got to look to know for sure whether your aircraft meets these requirements we're going to talk about tonight or not. So what are we talking about? We're going to be talking about fixed wing airplanes like these here. There's lots of aircraft that are similar to this. Again, I mentioned some standard category ones, lots of experimental aircraft that are out there, amateur built and whatnot. But there are some that of these type aircraft that are specifically certificated in the light sport category. You're going to see a lot of these, especially some of those that were converted over from the ultralight trainer world. A lot of those are going to look something like this Quicksilver here, and those are going to have some kind of a light sport certificate in most cases. Some of those may be amateur built as well, so you need to read the airworthiness certificate and make sure you know what you're dealing with. Might see something like this. You won't see any factory built gyroplanes, but you will see experimental light sport gyroplanes. So you might run into a gyroplane in the light sport experimental category. You might see a weight shift control aircraft, and those can be factory built or experimental. And you might even see balloons. So any of these things could turn up under the light sport umbrella. So be ready for that. All right, so let's start with the experimental light sport aircraft. That's the simplest and easiest of the categories to talk about, and a lot of this is going to be very, very, very similar to what we talked about last fall when we talked about amateur built aircraft. So if you were here for that webinar, you'll recognize a lot of these same points that I'm about to make here in the experimental light sport world. These could be fixed wing aircraft, they could be gliders, they could be weight shift control, or you might call them trikes. They could be gyroplanes, or they might be balloons. Any of those are allowed under the experimental light sport segment of the certification regulations. So what do the regs say? Yeah, we're going to talk about regulations. So it might make your head hurt a little bit, but we're going to soldier on through it here. So we start with, and when we're talking about maintenance, of course, we're going to start with 14 CFR Part 43, which is your preventive maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration section of the FAA regulations. So that's where we start off with when we start about any discussion about maintenance of any aircraft. So 43.1, the very first regulation, says applicability. What does this section of the regulations apply to? And it'll say an aircraft having a U.S. airworthiness certificate. Well, we do have that, so far, so good. But it says, except as provided in B and D of this section, this part describes rules governing maintenance, preventive maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration of any aircraft using an airworthiness, having a U.S. airworthiness certificate. Well, what are these exceptions that they're talking about? Well, 43.1B says this part does not underline. That's my highlight there. It's not printed in the reg that way, but I want to make sure you don't miss that word. This part does not apply to any aircraft for which the FAA has issued an experimental certificate, unless the FAA previously issued another kind of airworthiness certificate for that aircraft. So if your aircraft was built as an experimental aircraft, could be amateur built, could be light sport, might be exhibition, any of those experimental categories, if that experimental certificate is the very first certificate that aircraft ever got from the FAA, then Part 43, it says right here that Part 43, the entirety of Part 43 doesn't apply to that aircraft. It also says this part does not apply to any aircraft that the FAA issued an experimental certificate under I-3 of this chapter when that aircraft was originally issued a light sport category chapter or under the provision of 21.190. So this is the section that talks about those aircraft that started out life as a factory built, ready to fly, special light sport aircraft, and then somebody, for whatever reason, converted it to an experimental category. So, yes, that aircraft actually did hold a different kind of certificate other than experimental originally. And then it got switched over to experimental. So this allows that aircraft to kind of be treated just like it always had an experimental certificate. So either it had an experimental certificate since day one, or it had a special light sport certificate and was converted to experimental. So that's a very specific group of aircraft. And you might ask the question, why would somebody convert it? Well, there's a couple of main reasons. One of the main reasons is, let's say you bought one of the very early factory built light sports, and there was a bunch of them that jumped into the market right after the rules came into being, but not all of them are around anymore. And as we're going to go through this, you're going to find out that if there isn't a factory or some other approved uh, body that can provide support for these aircraft, there really isn't any way to keep them airworthy unless you convert them to experimental. So we call them orphan aircraft. An aircraft, the company went out of business. They didn't transfer the rights to the aircraft to any other entity or person. So the whole thing is kind of in limbo. You want to keep flying the aircraft. It can't get the factory support that it requires anymore as a special light sport. So you convert it to experimental and you go on and fly it. The other reason you might want to convert it is you want to make some modification to the aircraft and the factory doesn't support that modification. Everything that you do to a factory built special light sport after you have the aircraft in service, there has to be some approval process by the manufacturer or whoever is the official support body for that aircraft. They would have to approve whatever modification you want to make. Is it a different radio? Are you going to put floats on it? Is different propeller? Whatever those modifications might be, if it's not supported by the factory or the approved support person, then there's no way to do that unless you convert the aircraft to experimental. So those are the two main reasons why this particular facet might come into play. So what it really means, and what I just talked about, says that as far as Part 43 applicability, it means that in the basic regs, anyone might be allowed to do maintenance, repair, or modification with no FAA certificate required on these aircraft that are listed under these exceptions that I talked about. And then really there's no requirement for that book to be that work to be logged anywhere either, because all of those requirements are found in Part 43. And we just talked about the fact that Part 43 doesn't apply to these experimental aircraft. Well, that sounds pretty crazy, doesn't it? And well, yeah, we've got it covered. Part 91, our general operating rules, come to the rescue in this case. That says that Subpart E, the maintenance, preventive maintenance, and alterations section of Part 91. This is an operational rule now, but it talks about maintenance. And it says this part prescribes rules governing maintenance, preventive maintenance, and alteration to a U.S. civilian registered aircraft operating in or outside the United States. So, okay, now this sounds like it applies to our aircraft regardless of airworthiness certificate. And sure enough, it says it applies to all types of airworthiness certificates. So now we're kind of getting a little bit more, it's not the wide open spaces that we thought we had when we read Part 43, because this says we must list in detail what records must be kept. And those records are, yes, there are requirements, which I'm not going to go into. You can read the regs if you want, but you're going to have to keep records on maintenance, repairs, modifications, whatever you're going to do in accordance with Part 91. So you can't really just go willy-nilly and forget about regulations here. You still have to pay attention to what you're doing and keep proper records and all that stuff. But let's talk about these airworthiness certificates. And I have a picture there of the two types of airworthiness certificates you might find in your light sport aircraft. The older style is the pink one, which was a separate certificate that was typed out, literally typed on a typewriter, which I still have, by the way. And then that would be issued along with a set of operating limitations for each aircraft individually, and it lists the category, purpose, and all of the stuff you need to know to identify that aircraft and its airworthiness category. And then it would have a set of operating limitations attached to that. The newer style airworthiness certificate is like the white one there, where that pink piece of paper has gone away, and what the information that used to be on that pink certificate now is right at the top of the first page of the operating limitations. So now it's all combined in one document, and that document, by the way, must be carried in the aircraft at all times in order for the aircraft to be airworthy or legal. So make sure that you don't leave that behind after you've done some maintenance or something, and you end up flying the aircraft without that document in there because you're bound to get ramp checked that day, and that's going to be a problem for you. So airworthiness certificate will include operating limitation. This is regardless of whether it's an experimental light sport, a special light sport, an amateur built, whatever special category you might have, you're going to have operating limitations. Now, on a standard category airplane, the operating limitations are not an individual document like this. It would be the POH and all the required placards, and lots of different stuff is considered operating limitations. But the aircraft we're talking about tonight will actually have a document called the operating limitations, and it'll be a part of the airworthiness certificate. So it has to be in the aircraft. You'll find inspection requirements in those operating limitations, when it needs to be inspected, who's authorized to do the inspection, and how to return the aircraft to service. And of course, that comment is an FAA speak, means how do you sign it off so that it's legal to go back flying again. So those requirements in the case of a light sport, special or experimental, are going to be found in the operating limitations. So don't lose that document, because that's an important piece of paper. When I certificate an aircraft for an applicant, I will tell them to make a copy of this document, keep the original in the aircraft, and keep that copy with your maintenance records so that you can refer to it as many times as you want without taking the original out of the aircraft, because that way you know that it's always in there and you're always legal to fly the aircraft. So it's just a little suggestion to the wise there. It's not as rare as you think that these aircraft get caught without the operating limitations in them, and you just don't want to be there. So make sure that you have that document in the aircraft, and of course read it and make sure you understand all of the requirements that are in there, because you kind of can look at it like a mini set of regulations that apply specifically to your individual aircraft. So there's some important stuff in there that you need to know. So make sure that you read and understand the entire document. So the operations limitations are aircraft specific. They are identified by make, model, and serial number, so you can't trade them from one aircraft to another. Each aircraft will have its own specific set of operating limitations and airworthiness certificate. They must be carried in the aircraft. I talked about that already. And the inspection requirements will be found in there. Now this, again, we're kind of in the experimental side of things right now. So there will be a statement in there. It's very similar, if not exactly like this one, where it says no person may operate the aircraft unless within the preceding 12 calendar months it has had a condition inspection performed per the scope and detail of Appendix D to Part 43 of the manufacturer or other FAA-approved programs and found to be in a condition for safe operation. And that's the key phrase there. We don't use the term airworthy, even though we issue airworthiness certificates. It's another place where the FAA has decided to confuse us a little bit. The definition of airworthy found in the regulations says that the aircraft has to be in a condition for safe operation and has to meet its type certificate or other supplemental type certificates. Well, we don't have type certificates for these experimental aircraft or light sport aircraft, so they can't technically be airworthy. They can, however, be in a condition for safe operation. So that is your operational standard, if you will, or your maintenance standard for these aircraft. And that's why it uses that term in this statement. So 99.9% of these aircraft are going to be inspected under Appendix D to Part 43, which is a nice checklist of maintenance items you're supposed to check with each inspection. If it was originally a special light sport aircraft that's been converted, you will also have a manufacturer's checklist that you can go by. Some of the kit manufacturers will provide checklists as well. So as long as it covers all of the information on Appendix D to Part 43 and any other items that are specific to the aircraft, that's your guide that you would use to perform these inspections. It will say that the inspection must be recorded in the aircraft maintenance records, your logbooks typically, showing the following or a similarly worded statement. And then here is the actual sign off, the return to service, if you will, that you would write in the maintenance records. You certify the aircraft's been inspected on a certain date per the whatever the checklist you use, scope and detail of Part 43, or whatever manufacturer's procedures you might have used, and it's found to be in a condition for safe operation. Again, there's that key verbiage that we need to use to get these aircraft back in service. And again, this is right in the operating limitations, so you can look this up anytime and uh, remind yourself what the particular verbiage is supposed to be. And then the entry will also include the aircraft's total time in service or cycles if appropriate. And cycles would be talking more about turbine stuff. Typically not really something we run into on light sport aircraft because as of right now, pending the Mosaic rules coming into effect. Right now, we don't have turbine aircraft in light sports, so probably don't have cycles involved. But you want the name, signature, certificate number, and type of certificate held by the person performing the inspection. Well, what's that all mean? And here it is. For specifically to experimental light sport, the owner operator can do that inspection if they hold the repairman certificate for that aircraft. Again, it's aircraft specific. That was issued under 65107, or an appropriately rated FAA certificated mechanic, which is lawyer speak for an A&P, or any appropriately rated FAA repair station. So you've got three different options there as far as who is authorized to return that aircraft to service after performing that inspection. So again, I noticed I said A and P since it's not an annual inspection, because again, an annual inspection goes back to airworthiness, which talks about type certificates. We don't have that, so we don't need an IA to an inspection authorization to do this inspection. You just need to be a FAA certificated mechanic, which is an A and P. So a lot of A&Ps do hold an IA as well, of course, but they don't really need that particular authorization in order to do these inspections. And again, the repair station would have to be authorized in their repair station manual to do these, and not all repair stations are authorized for that. So you'd have to be careful if you're taking it to a repair station for the inspection to make sure they're actually authorized to do it under the repair station manual. So some little ins and outs there to watch out for. The course of instruction we'll talk about here in a little bit if you want to get that repairman certificate for your individual aircraft. And again, notice it says owner operator here. It doesn't say builder. Because again, if it's an ELSA that was converted from an SLSA, the old original manufacturer is the builder. On an ELSA that's built from a kit, the kit vendor, be it Vans Aircraft or whoever, they're actually shown as the manufacturer. So you can't get one as the builder of that aircraft either. So in the case of an ELSA, it's the owner or operator who takes the course of instruction to get that repairman certificate, who's going to be authorized to do that. So several different ways to approach that. But again, this information, the requirements that I'm talking about, are found in the operating limitations of the aircraft. So, and also the other thing that's in there that we want to talk just a little bit about is major changes. And this is where this whole thing might come in, where you want to switch an SLSA to an ELSA because you want to make a major change to the aircraft. You have to reestablish compliance with the flight testing requirement to show that the aircraft actually performs appropriately and is controllable through its standard envelope of performance and all that stuff. So you're going to have some flight testing involved, and you're going to have to talk to the geographically responsible FSDO to make sure that they're okay with the flight test area, and get their response in writing and make sure that everybody's on the same page there. So that's another section of the operating limitations that you may want to take a look at. This is just a real quick guide about major changes. If you change the propeller to a different make and model, that's a major change because you've got performance issues, you got weight and balance issues, lots of stuff, vibration issues you needed to test for there. So change the propeller, that's a major change. Obviously, if you change an engine, different make, different model, higher or lower horsepower, again, got weight and balance issues, you got performance issues, lots of things going on there. So that's always considered a major change. Configuration changes. The biggest one here would be if you put floats or skis on the aircraft. That would be a major change. If you change it from a tailwheel aircraft to a nosewheel aircraft, that would be a major change. And some of these aircraft in this category are capable of making that change relatively easily. And I say relatively because it's not really like an overnight thing, but they already have the capability of making that change without, disassembling half the structure and starting from scratch, so to speak. So that could be a possible configuration change you might make, and that would be considered a major change. There's other things. Fuel system changes is another big one. Did you add an auxiliary tank? Did you replumb the system to a different scheme, put a different valve in? Did you add a fuel pump? Did you take out a fuel pump? That's a serious reliability thing because if you go back and look at the accident information, the accident statistics on lots of experimental aircraft, fuel-related issues are one of the major causal factors. So really got to be careful with fuel systems. So any kind of a change to the fuel system would be a major change, and that's the kind of thing you need to approve using the procedure called out in your operating limitations. Not really a big deal, but it's something that really needs to be paid attention to because otherwise your aircraft is flying around with a change that's not been properly approved. And again, that is certainly a possibility to get you into trouble. So you want to watch out for that. All right, so that's experimental. Pretty basic, pretty simple, very, very similar to amateur built aircraft. So we can talk now about the more involved process of maintenance on the factory built LSA. These are commonly referred to as SLSA or special LSA. You'll see that term thrown around. Anytime you see SLSA or you hear special LSA, we're talking about the factory built, sold, ready to fly light sport aircraft. They are sold complete and ready to fly, as I just mentioned, and they are built under ASTM standards. Rather than an FAA like Part 23 is a standard for factory built standard category aircraft. These are not built under the FARs as far as the approval for manufacture. They are actually built under ASTM standards. They are not experimental aircraft. And that's a confusing thing too. We get people that think that just because it's got a special airworthiness certificate, you treat it just like an experimental. That is definitely not the case with these factory-built LSA aircraft. They are a specific category unto themselves. They are not experimental. They are a special airworthiness category. So be careful of that. Again, they will have operating limitations issued as a part of their airworthiness certificate or along with their airworthiness certificate. And this is an important point here. This aircraft may only, I should have probably highlighted only, but they can only be operated per the manufacturer's operating instructions and the engine operating instructions, including any requirement for operating equipment specified in the aircraft's equipment list. So, I mean, this tells you that you can't just go willy-nilly and do what you want. You have to follow the manufacturer's guidance on operating these aircraft. Only be operated per manufacturer's aircraft operating instructions. So we're getting a little closer to a standard category airplane without really being standard category yet. We're kind of in the middle ground there. Night flight or instrument flight rules are authorized if allowed by the aircraft operating instructions and the engine operating instructions, and the requirements of 91.205 are installed, operational, and maintained in accordance with Part 91. So if you look at 91.205, that's your minimum required equipment for standard aircraft. Again, we're now using operating limitations to tie us back to the regulations that typically only apply to standard aircraft. So 91.205 would talk about your basic instruments for VFR. It talks about your basic requirements for night flight, and then one builds on top of the other. If you want to do IFR, you have to have all the IFR equipment, plus all the night equipment, plus all the VFR equipment. So it's like a building block process that 91.205 talks about. So again, if you've got all that equipment and the aircraft manufacturer and engine manufacturer allow you to operate under IFR or night, then the aircraft can do that if it's flown by a pilot that can fly at night. And that's the other little turn in the road here, is that a sport pilot, if you're flying the aircraft as a sport pilot, you can only operate day VFR. So regardless of what the manufacturer says, you're limited by your pilot certificate to stay day VFR. If you're a private pilot or higher, and you happen to be flying this light sport aircraft, and you're authorized obviously to fly at night or IFR, and the aircraft is now authorized by the manufacturer, then you're allowed to operate that aircraft. So you've got a couple of different places to look for, whether you're allowed to do these operations or not. Pilot problems, aircraft problems. So you got to make sure you have all those bases covered in order to be able to operate at night or IFR. All maintenance or inspection of this equipment should underline that one too, must be recorded in the aircraft maintenance records and include the following items. And look, that kind of looks like the same thing we talked about previously. You got to have the date, the work performed, name of the certificate of the person returning the aircraft to service. So again, Part 43 said maybe this doesn't apply, but the operating limitations and Part 91 both say, well, yeah, they really do. You've got to keep these records. So be aware of that. So yes, we look at Part 43 again. This part applies to any aircraft issued a special airworthiness certificate in the light sport category, except for the repair and alteration form specified in 43.5 and 43.9 is not required to be completed for products not produced under an FAA approval. We're talking about a Form 337, which you would file if you did a major modification or a major alteration or a major repair to a standard category airplane. Don't file one of those for your light sport aircraft because it's not going to go anywhere. It's not required. You're just going to confuse somebody at FAA aircraft records because they won't know what to do with it because it's not part of the program for light sport aircraft. So don't play with that. So who can do it? Now we're getting down to the meat of our presentation here. After all of that preamble, we're going to talk about who can do it. Talk about the 91-327 aircraft having a special airworthiness certificate in the light sport category. Okay, so now we're talking again about factory light sport aircraft, special airworthiness certificate in the light sport category, not experimental. You can't operate the aircraft with the special airworthiness and light sport category unless, this is important now, pay attention kids, the aircraft is maintained by a certificated repairman with a light sport aircraft maintenance rating or an appropriately rated mechanic, again, an A&P, or an appropriately rated repair station in accordance with the applicable provision of Part 43 of this chapter and the maintenance and inspection and, not or, and the maintenance inspections procedures developed by the aircraft manufacturer or a person acceptable to the FAA. Now that last line was put in there because some of these aircraft manufacturers change hands. Some of them go out of business. As long as they pass along that authority to support these aircraft to some person or entity, that aircraft can continue to be maintained as a special light sport aircraft. If they don't do that, the manufacturer goes out of business and doesn't pass along that authorization. That's when you have to convert the aircraft to experimental. So let's talk about these repairman certificates. There's two ratings. Both talked about, or you can look under 65107. That's the regulation that talks about these particular repairman certificates. And there's two ratings. One is the inspection certificate. You can get that if you're the owner of the aircraft and you take this 16-hour course of training. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about the repairman for a experimental light sport aircraft. You need to be the owner. You need to take the course of training, and then that actual aircraft by serial number will be listed on your repairman certificate, and you'll be allowed to do the condition inspection on that aircraft for as long as you are the owner of it. And so that's the 16-hour course. So that's basically, they typically give it over a weekend. There's only a couple of places that give these. You can go on the website and search that out, repairman certificate, light sport inspection. Or there's the maintenance course. Course length varies by aircraft type. When I say aircraft type, I mean, is it fixed wing? Is it weight shift? Is it a balloon? Is it a rotorcraft? We don't know. Well, it won't be a rotorcraft because they aren't allowed yet in the special light sport category. That may change when and if Mosaic comes into being, but we haven't seen the official final rule on that yet. This is a 120-hour course for airplanes, which is obviously the most common of all the maintenance repairman certificates. And this is the repairman certificate that allows you two things. It allows you to work on aircraft that are certificated as special light sport aircraft, the factory built aircraft. And it also allows you to work on aircraft that you do not own. So now you have the opportunity, if you so choose, to work on other people's light sport aircraft, again, factory built light sport aircraft, as a holder of a repairman certificate light sport with a maintenance rating. So that's the two types of repairman certificates. And of course, the one you're going to want is the one that relates to the aircraft that you are planning to do the maintenance on. The key here to this whole thing on the factory built aircraft, and this is something I have to continue to remind A&P mechanics of specifically, because this is not business as usual for those that have been working on aircraft for years and years and years under standard category. This is a kind of a new kettle of fish here that we're swimming in, and this is the key: all maintenance, repair, or alteration of the SLSA must be performed in accordance with manufacturer's instructions, which include what level of certification is required for the person performing the operation. Whoa, wait a minute, what's that mean? In the maintenance manuals that come with these aircraft from the manufacturer, and by the way, every aircraft is sold with an aircraft operating manual, with a flight training supplement, and with a maintenance manual. Every aircraft comes with one. So if the aircraft doesn't have it, something's missing. It has to be with the aircraft. In that maintenance manual, it will specify somehow, either by a block of performed maintenance or by individual lines, it'll say what's the level of certification required to do this maintenance. And it might be the owner, simply the owner, as like for preventive maintenance. It might be the holder of the maintenance rating, light sport repairman. It might be an FAA mechanic. It might be the manufacturer itself. It might be a certain repair station. That will be spelled out specifically in the maintenance manual, and it has to be adhered to. We ran into a bunch of problems with this when these aircraft were brand new back in the early 2000s. You'd get a maintenance manual, and it would say, you're going to change the nose wheel tire. And a line below that says this can be performed by a repairman with a maintenance rating. And it didn't say anything else. Well, that meant that was the only person authorized to do that particular maintenance function. So I was doing a certification on one of these, and I asked the applicant, I said, well, who's your FAA repairman maintenance? And I got this blank look, and then they finally said, well, what do you mean? And I explained to them what that requirement was calling for, and they got on the phone right away to the actual aircraft manufacturer, and pretty soon there was a revision to that maintenance manual that broadened the spectrum of who could do that. It was a repairman maintenance or an A&P or a repair station, kind of in ascending order, because you don't want to restrict it that much, or else sooner or later you're going to run into a time when you're at an airport and you've got a maintenance issue and the proper person isn't there. So there was a lot of learning experience that went on in the manufacturers to understand just exactly what that regulation was talking about. So the key is you've got to follow the manufacturer's instructions. You can't just do it the way you've always done it. You can't do it the way you think it should be done. You can't do it the way you did it on your amateur built aircraft. You have to do it in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. And that's really a key. So be aware of that. So the bottom line is, this is kind of the real crux of this, is make sure you understand what airworthiness category your aircraft is certificated under and follow the maintenance requirement for that certification category. And that I'm talking about every aircraft that you might operate, whether you're a sport pilot, a private pilot, whether you're flying an experimental aircraft, a light sport aircraft. Make sure you know what aircraft you're flying and whatever regulations apply to that aircraft from the maintenance standpoint. You need to follow that. If it's a standard category airplane, you got to have an annual inspection. You got to have, the properly authorized people doing the maintenance on there. You can't be doing it yourself like you do on your amateur built aircraft. Even though the aircraft fits the light sport category from a pilot standpoint, it doesn't make it a light sport aircraft from a certification standpoint. It's just two different things completely there. So again, dig in there, look at the airworthiness certificate, see what kind of an airworthiness certificate the aircraft has, and if it doesn't say light sport someplace on it, either the first line or the second line, then this whole thing we've just talked about doesn't apply to that aircraft. Learn what aircraft you have and make sure it's maintained in accordance with the regulations that apply to that specific category of certification, because that's really the key to keeping these aircraft safe and legal. So, a little bit of study and understanding there goes a long way to make sure you're doing things right. So that's the prepared part of my presentation here. Again, any questions about this? As Troy said, obviously you can talk to your FISDO. They're happy to help. You can also call EAA. The membership at EAA.org is the website that, or the email you can use, or there's their 800 number. Call and talk to their membership representatives. They know most of these answers, and if they don't know the answers, they'll definitely get you pointed towards the person who does know the answer. So, you can use that opportunity to talk with EAA. They're always there to help you. And I encourage you, if you're not a member of EAA, by all means, please join up. They are the voice for experimental and light sport aircraft in the industry. So certainly support EAA if you're not already doing it. If you want to get a hold of me specifically, that's an email address you can use to send an email directly to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. And again, if I don't know the answer, I will certainly get you pointed towards a person that does. So, with that, we can open it up to whatever questions we might have had, and we'll see if we can get some folks helped out.